Hello and welcome to C-Suite Secrets. I'm Heather Parsons, your host. I'm a serial entrepreneur, fractional CFO, and a business value strategist. I've spent years juggling business and family life while helping entrepreneurs scale, optimize cash flow, and build real financial success. On our show, we bring you real conversations with founders, executives, and operators about what actually moves the needle in their business. No fluff, no filler, just smart systems, strategies that work, and insights that you can put to use in your business right away. With that, let's dive right in. Today on our show, we have Nacho Guzmán. Nacho, welcome.
Hi, Heather. How are you?
Doing
Glad.
good. Glad to have you here and excited for the conversation. For folks who may not know you, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you become an entrepreneur in your business?
So, I opened my business 18 years ago. I'm in advertising. We're an advertising agency called Latin Brand. We're a multinational agency. We're based here in San Antonio, Texas. We also have offices in Mexico, in Argentina. We're an agency focused on helping clients reach at a cultural level multicultural and Hispanic consumers.
I love it. Being in 18 years is a really long time. So, what has kept you in the game when so many other agencies don't make it?
I think, and I heard it from a friend of mine that owns an agency as well, and is never give up. A advertising agency, the business is very cyclical. Sometimes you're up, sometimes you're down. And I think what has been our secret has to reinvent ourselves every time that we have been down. In an advertising agency, unlike other businesses, there's kind of like not a set pattern on how you're going to be successful, when you're going to be successful. Unfortunately, for an advertising agency, you're a call away from financial disaster, or you're a call away from having to let go people. And it's difficult, but each time we had to redefine ourselves and reinvent what the agency stood for.
I think that's really smart. I talk to a lot of founders, and that grit of never quitting on top of that being able to reinvent yourself is really a defining moment for a lot of agencies, whether they're in marketing and advertising or they're doing other things. But in your space, I see that as even more important because if I think about over my lifetime, and I was talking to somebody about this morning actually, it's gone from everybody advertises on TV, and now we have AI and Google Business and social media. There's been such a wide range of things that go on in this market. So, what are some of the key things that you've seen change with that, and how can businesses kind of navigate some of those changes?
One of the things that I have seen change is the value of advertising, or the value of what we do. And it not only applies to the advertising, it applies to a lot of fields with AI, with previous to that, with social media, previous to that, with crowdsourcing. There was kind of like a hindrance of the value that we provide as an agency. And sometimes clients feel they can do that with AI for free. Sometimes they
Mm-hmm.
feel they can do it with crowdsourcing for free. And at one point, social media was seen as that. You can do advertising for free. You don't need an advertising agency. So the biggest challenge that we have right now, not only in advertising, but in a lot of other fields, is to be able to show that value and for clients to pay for it, because it has been really difficult to reinvent ourselves with things that are outside of our control. And probably the biggest piece of advice that I have is, when you reinvent yourself and when you're changing to these different challenges, focus more on the internal factors rather than the external factors. We always blame the economy, we always blame the clients, the AI, and we blame a bunch of stuff. but we never blame ourselves. And I think it's healthy to look for the internal blame and see what can we change.
I think that's a really fair point, because you mentioned the economy and all of those things. As an entrepreneur, I can't control any of that, right? So I think focusing on things that we can actually do something about makes a huge difference. It makes not only a difference in our business, but a difference in our attitude. It's really easy to, watch the news for 30 or 45 minutes in the afternoon and be depressed because everything you hear is the world's going to hell in a handbasket and you can't do anything about any of it, right? But that internal look that you're talking about gives you the control back as a business owner. Now you can do something about it. Maybe your retention's not great. Maybe you're done a lot of this free marketing and advertising, but it just doesn't hit because now you sound like a drone because all of your stuff comes straight from AI and nobody wants to hear it. So, any thoughts on that whatsoever?
I think one of the things that throughout history we've been trying to do is replicate that human connection.
Mm-hmm.
And I think overall we have failed miserably in replicating that. And we have always tried to replicate that human connection. And not only with AI, I think we have seen it many, many times throughout history. And I think one of the things that we are never going to be able to replicate, and we have as a testament of that, is COVID. We never could replicate that physical human connection. There were a lot of Zoom calls, there were a lot of things, but we never were able to replicate that human connection. And I think even though AI has been touted like this revolutionary force, yes, but I think as of right now, it hasn't been able to replicate that human emotion. And for me, that human emotion is what can distinguish an entrepreneur, can distinguish a business, and can distinguish a startup.
I couldn't agree more. I think AI, you mentioned AI, I think it's great for doing things smarter, faster, working harder without so many time constraints, but it's never going to replace that human factor, just like what you're talking about. But I do think that entrepreneurs need to find a way to use some of these tools because those of us, if we don't do that, we're slower than our competition. We may become not quite as relevant, but we really need to solve business problems with these tools, not replace our brain or how we think critically about stuff.
I was once in a conference and the panelists were talking about the the way that in the past people got ice, and basically was were people that went to a lake, they cut up a piece, and then they commercialized that. So that when the ice machines came about, and with that whole revolution, the people that went to the lakes for the ice, they went out of business because they didn't change. So that's kind of like a timeless lesson that we have of how we need to change. Like, for example, as well in my field, photography. 20, 30 years ago, it was the analog way. Now it has changed to digital. And for a photographer to say that they don't do digital, well, they're in the ice ages. So I
Mm-hmm.
think what we need to do is be very humble and let go of that way of working and being open to a new way of work.
Absolutely. I think change is inevitable, um, or we'll face the consequences of that, just like the person you're talking about going out of business.
Hmm.
And I know you and I, whenever we talked initially, you talked a little bit about having near death experiences in business. And I think every entrepreneur instantly knows exactly what that means and probably has a time in their business that they felt the same. So, what were some of the biggest lessons that come out of those hard lessons for you and evolving as an entrepreneur?
I think when we're talking about those near death experiences, for me, there's two types. The one that is financial, and the other one where you lose faith on yourself. And financial, there's a lot of tips that we can talk about,
Yeah.
but one of the lessons that I have learned is it's not the same to be employed than to be an employer. And the way that you need to take care of expenses is really important. Sometimes you feel like $500 that you spent on something, it's not a whole lot. But then if you multiply that by 12 months, that's a whole lot. If you multiply that by another $500 and something else, it's a whole lot. So, one of the things that I have learned is to be very educated or very organized in what we do in terms of finances. And that has to be your priority. And sometimes we feel, especially in a creative field, just because I'm creative, I shouldn't be organized. I shouldn't be disciplined. I shouldn't be financially savvy because I'm a creative and I can do whatever I want. And that's not the reality. And I think no matter the field that you pick, there are principles about owning a business that apply to every field, especially for creative fields like myself. So, another thing that I have noticed is the worst thing that you can do is lose faith in yourself. That's the worst thing. And that's where you have a near death experience because you start losing faith. And if you don't believe in yourself, how can you expect others to believe in you?
That's such a good point. I could talk for days on that financial piece. And I'll say this for creatives in particular, and I feel this way about business holistically. I think it's a team sport. If you think you're not good at finances, if that's something that you just don't want to do, surround yourself with people who are good at it. Talk to people. Don't just hire somebody and let them do everything. If you look at major athletes and people who just hand over full financial control, they usually wind up burnt at the end. You got to put some controls in place for that. But build the team around you who can help you with some of this stuff and take the responsibility. A lot of this is not hard, it's just time consuming. And it's not the sexy part of running business.
When I started my business, I read something that has stuck with me forever. And it was focus on your strengths and staff your weaknesses. So that's a phrase that I have applied always. And I always think about Steven Spielberg. Steven Spielberg, we all know him. Well, we might not know his editor, we might not know his screenwriter, his cameraman, and he always worked with the same people. Why? Because it's about a team and makes him look better.
Right. Exactly. And I think that applies whenever I was in corporate America working for a large accounting firm, it was the same thing. You didn't want everybody on your team to be good at the same things. You needed somebody who could be visionary and really drive what your team was doing. You needed a doer on there that could get stuff done, whatever it was. You needed somebody to manage project cost. And I don't think as entrepreneurs that it's any different. We just don't have quite as many resources, and a lot of times we have to wear hats that we don't really want to. And the sooner we can get out of some of those, the better off we are.
So, another business that I have had for 26 years is my marriage.
Ah,
And it's also something that you look for ways to complement each other. I want someone that is exactly like me. And I think sometimes we have been taught that we need to look for people that are the same and they're like minded and they're a copy of us. And that's how we look for friends, that's how we look for employees. But once again, you need to focus on your strengths and staff your weaknesses.
absolutely. I think that's true in business and in marriage both. Otherwise, it's pretty boring as well.
Yeah, you need to be challenged. And it's okay to have some friction, some healthy dose of friction, and a healthy dose of chaos, and a healthy dose of, I don't know what I'm doing. So it's always to have that little friction, because I have seen that businesses, marriages that don't work are the ones that don't embrace reality and embrace exactly what's going on. And you need to embrace it. And sometimes it's going to be good. Sometimes it's going to be bad. Most of the times it's going to be bad, but you need to be able not to give up.
For sure. As you're talking there, it made me think about the rule of thirds. For if folks aren't familiar with it, it's a third of the time things are great, third of the time things are okay, and a third of the time things suck. So as long as we can keep that in mind, I think that's a great perspective about what you're saying, because it's not all peaches and cream, right? Being an entrepreneur a lot of times is like waking up in the morning, going to the office, getting kicked a few times, and coming back every single day to get a few more of those, right? Especially starting out. It's not easy. You just have to work through it and be willing to stick it out until it gets better. And I think whenever you and I had initially talked as well, we talked a little bit about some of the tools and things that have changed for entrepreneurs. So, with that being one of the biggest advantages that entrepreneurs have today, what do you wish that you would have had starting out that makes your life a lot easier today as an entrepreneur?
I think is the breadth of information that is readily available right now. Right now, if you want to send an email and you send an email, you can put on AI and say, is this a good email? And I think we learn a whole lot by trial and error. And unfortunately, there were a lot of mistakes that we did. There's still mistakes that we do. And I think the tools right now, it helps you find that compass in terms of determining what you should do. And sometimes when you're starting, you're very stubborn, and you think you know it all. You think you have done it all. You think that you're going to revolutionize the world in a certain way, yes, but you're very stubborn and you don't listen. So having a tool that helps you analyze what you're saying, probably you sent a presentation that was too long. You did a lot of things for a client and you overwhelmed him. And I didn't have kind of like a sounding board that helped me understand if I was doing it correctly or not. And most of the times I failed. And I think the tools right now allow you to look for information that allows you to gauge where you at. It allows you to have a second opinion, and it allows you to find like-minded people in different places that can help you in a way that wasn't available 18, 19 years ago.
That makes a lot of sense, because I think about all of these tools and information that's out there. We're still trying to solve the same business problems, a lot of the same ones that have been around for eons,
Mhm.
right? So, what would you tell a founder who thinks that they need a stack of paid tools in order to look legit or get some of this information?
In a way, it's true. In a way, there's a certain market that when you go with clients, you say, oh, I have this tool and this other tool. But I think in my line of business, creativity is not only apply to what we sell, but also how we solve our business. And I think sometimes we forget about being resourceful. And me being Mexican, I mean, being resourceful is part of my DNA as being Mexican. And I'm always looking for ways to be resourceful. And I always look for ways that there's a better solution. And I think sometimes we're fed with the notion that we need to invest a lot of money. And if you invest a lot of money, that's a great solution. But when we were talking initially, we also were talking about international resources and international tools. COVID, what did opened the doors to a lot of international tools. And a lot of those international tools, a lot of those international resources, guess what? There's no tariffs, there's no restrictions. You can use it in many ways. And there's a lot of really good people in many different countries that can help you maximize your resources. And what I always say is all the subscriptions that you get is a double-edged sword, because sometimes you get too many and all of a sudden you're paying $5,000, $6,000 in tools that half of them you haven't used in a year.
Yeah.
So, and you have those things not until you're looking at your P&L and you ask the CPA, what's I need a new website.com? Oh, that's something that you got 2 years ago. And I've been paying $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 for that, and I'm not using it. So sometimes it's a double-edged sword.
Yeah, I agree. And that's where, as I think about that, that goes back to if that's not your strong suit and you're not looking at it every single month to say, okay, these are all the widgets that I'm paying for, you need to have somebody who's helping you with it. Because if you don't, you'll bring money in the front door and it walks right out the back. And that's where a lot of entrepreneurs that I start working with, that's what I see is they're bringing in good business, they work hard, they're really killing it, but at the end of the day there's too much for them to manage by themselves, and a lot of that money winds up walking out the back door, and that's the last thing that we want.
When I started my agency, I read a book and forgot the name of the book, but it had an example of this girl that she loved to bake. And all of a sudden, she decided to do a bakery. And the bakery is not an easy business like any
No.
other business. But she started to get the disillusion with the fact of owning a bakery. And she started hating being a baker. So, one of the things that I have learned is once again, there are basic principles of being an entrepreneur, and there are basic things that you need, and you need to be disciplined. Because if you don't have if there's no plan, you fail to plan. So, and you plan to fail. So that's the truth about the entrepreneurship world.
Absolutely. And if I think about that from an operational standpoint, agencies can get messy, and having that plan I think is super important because you're managing a lot of things. You've got clients, timelines, billing, revisions. So what systems or processes have you built to kind of keep the business running smoothly over time?
There's two things that I focus on. One is teamwork. I think sometimes creativity and sometimes a lot of business they become very individualistic, and it's all about me, 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 and I have done this, praise me, but we forget about the teamwork. So some of the things that I apply to my business is how can we work as a team? How can we work better? And how can we take advantage of all the different strengths? And sometimes creativity in most businesses, most service businesses are very subjective. How we can change something or the opinions are very subjective when it comes to services. Another thing that we do is time management. There's a lot of wasted time between I'm going to Starbucks, between let me check this, I need to get inspired. There's a lot of wasted time. And I think one of the things that we have done in our processes is figure out the utilization rate and the capacity that we have. So getting that organized, making sure there's communication, and a feel about communication. Sometimes we're really bad communicators. and we're really bad at communicating from the client to the lead stakeholders to a lot of different people. We're really bad communicators. So for me, it's a lot about learning to communicate, manage that time, and work as a team.
I love that. And as somebody who's built multicultural international teams, you've built teams across the US, Mexico, Argentina, and you've worked through formal and freelance models. What have you learned about building an international team that most business owners underestimate?
I think finding a common cultural ground. There's a lot of cultural nuances that we sometimes forget. Like, for example, I was born in Minneapolis, Minnesota, raised in Mexico. Then I moved back to the States, worked in the States. And when I opened my own agency, I had people in Mexico and they told me, you know what, Nacho, it's 2 hours for lunch. And I was like, what? Yes, 2 hours for lunch. And that's it. And we get in at 10 o'clock and that's it. And I had to find a way to move around those cultural nuances. The first thing that you need to think about is no one is wrong. We're all right. We just have different cultures that allows us to see life in a different perspective. And there's nothing that is wrong or right. It's just different. So what we have done is to find those cultural connections that allows us to have one common culture. And that's why it's really important to build the culture of the agency. For example, in our case is we're an agency that gets in early, that is never late, that we will do whatever we can to meet the deadlines of our clients. And we try to work harder than other agencies. I don't know if we're better, but we work harder. And that's something that I can tell a client with a straight face.
I like that. And as I think about what you're saying there, I find that that's true in a lot of business. I think about my accounting practice. There are probably smarter accountants out there, but there are very few who will outwork me. And at the end of the day, when you add that and you add grit on top of it, and you're not somebody who will quit, I think that's a great formula for longevity in business because that's what it takes. You have to be willing to go the extra mile and work with folks and build that team like you're talking about.
And we go back to your question about AI. AI, there's a point where it says, I'm sorry, Heather, I don't understand what you're telling me. I'm sorry,
Mhm.
Heather, I don't have a reference. They won't say, okay, Heather, give me a second. Let me go and search that. Let me give me the day to think about it. Give me the day. No, AI, there's not a passion prompt. There's not a prompt that you put that says, give me more passion on what you're doing. Give me more commitment. Work harder than the other AIs. No. And at the end of the day, there's a lot of talk that we're going to get replaced by AI. So,
There's a lot of
and
talk.
people are freaking out. I have a friend that he is a conspiracist. He always sends me videos about that, and people are freaking out, and people are going crazy. But at the end of the day, humans created AI. The moment where AI creates humans, that's where we will freak out. But so far, we're okay.
I agree. No, I get tickled and laugh about all of this conspiracy around AI because it is a tool. And being around in business for a little while, I remember a lot of the same stuff when the internet first came out.
Mhm.
It was going to be the end of time, right? And we've been doing this for 25, 30 years now, and we're still okay. We just work a little differently. Same with multicultural teams. When we got the internet, now it's a lot easier to have remote work and really leverage some of these resources internationally, which for me has always been a huge benefit because I'm somebody who thinks that there's enough for everybody out there, right? But whenever a lot of people they hear remote work, they think about flexibility, but I think there's a lot of accountability that also comes with that. So how do you create accountability within your teams without micromanaging them, especially in this multicultural workforce?
I'm going to admit something. I'm a micromanager. And sometimes it's hard to not to be a micromanager. And I had to find ways to get rid of that. And I need to hear other people. I need to give them some space. But one of the things that I have seen is that with trying to manage that is give space to the rest of the people so they can talk about what they want to say, and you don't have all the answers. And even though I might look perfect, I might be really wise, I'm not, and I'm imperfect. And I think sometimes we believe as business owners that we're perfect and that we're gods, and we're not. We're human beings and we're mortals like everybody else. We sweat, we cry like everybody else, and we have a life like everybody else. So I think the more we put that in context, the more helpful it is for the rest.
That's a great point, and I definitely want to touch on that here in a few minutes as well before we wrap up. But before we get to that, I'd love to dive in a little bit on, being a multicultural, Hispanic focused organization. You've built a business around that, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on what companies, particularly here in the US, misunderstand about marketing to Hispanic or multicultural audiences.
Yeah, I think sometimes they forget that emotional connection. There's the word that is used by many agencies that we don't translate, we transadapt. And we believe in that transadaptation. We believe in that cultural nuance. And I think one of the things that has been forgotten, especially right now, is cultural relevance is always going to be important no matter the political climate, no matter what other peoples might think. And I think there's always going to be a need for cultural connection. And that applies not only to Hispanics, it applies to any type of ethnicity and any type of people out there. So I think what we need to strive for is for that human connection, and that human connection is based on insights. And sometimes we forget of those insights, and sometimes we want to make it practical. We want to make sure that I save money by translating and it's cheaper. But at the end of the day, it's not as effective as something that is culturally relevant and based in emotion and based on that human connection.
I love that. And I want to talk a little bit about that, just translating things, and what do brands get wrong whenever they try to just translate instead of actually connecting with their audience?
Translating, there's a lot of cultural context. In the pandemic era, I was bored, so I decided to learn French. And I learned French at when I was 45. So now I became trilingual at the age of 47. So I learned that there's a lot of cultural context in some of those expressions. And
Yeah.
when you translate, for example, fainting in French, it translates to I stumble over the apples. So it doesn't have any context. If I tell you I stumble over the apples, you're not going to understand what I'm saying. So I think when you translate, and I try to explain, stumble over the apples, it's very hard to understand. And there's a lot of nuances that you miss. When we got married and when we started having kids, we made a very important decision. And it was, are we going to talk in English to our kids or we're going to talk in Spanish? So we decided to speak to them in Spanish. And they not only became bilingual, they also became bicultural. And I think it's not the same to be bilingual or trilingual or fourlingual or multilingual than to be multicultural.
That's a very good point. We're a multicultural house, and just speaking from my own experience, that's hard to do, is to blend it in because we all bring our own experiences, and you don't always have both sides of that. So trying to figure it out and navigate it, especially with kids, is not easy. And being able to have that, cultural identity is something that they want from a kid's perspective. And I think that as we look at it from a client perspective, that's the same thing. It's like, hey, I am like you. This does apply to me. And how can you help me or improve my situation or understand me better as a person?
Yeah, my daughter, she's the youngest. I have two kids. And she always says that there's a lot of things that are hard to say in English that sound better in Spanish. Most of them are curse words, but we're not going to get into that.
That's
And
true.
sometimes curse words sounds better in Spanish. I'm sorry, but they do. But she always says that there are things that sounded better in Spanish. And I think when we try to do things is we try to focus on translating the solution rather than trans-adapting the universal truth.
Wow. That's a good point. And I think that you were talking a little bit about humility there. That's been a great theme coming through all of this as well. So, whenever we were talking before, you said that one of the biggest things that founders forget is to stay humble.
Mhm.
So, why is humility such an advantage in business, especially after you start seeing some success?
Because when you start seeing success, you stop being humble and you stop looking at the different warning signs and the different red flags. And you start to be drunk with success. And you start to, and being drunk with success is very challenging and it's very dangerous because you start forgetting, like, for example, oh, I'm doing really good with my business and I have a lot of business. But have you done new business calls? Have you looked at your finances? And you start to forget a lot of those red flags because you're the greatest. And there's no one that matches you. And you have succeeded. And I'm in for that. But you get drunk with success and you stop being humble. And that's probably a lesson that I learned from a friend of mine. She is at AT&T and she told me always be humble. No matter how much success you have, no matter how much you think you have achieved what you wanted, at the end of the day, we're just a speck within the whole world. We're just like a little speck. And it's okay that we're a little speck. And the more humble you are, the more successful you're going to be.
I love it. That's some great wisdom right there.
And I can do a
So,
t-shirt about
absolutely, you probably should hand them out to a couple of folks.
that.
So one question for you before we wrap up. I really enjoyed our conversation today. So, Nacho, what is one secret that you wish you would have known starting out as an entrepreneur?
That I go back to something that you said, the sexy part. The one secret that will have thought that I wanted to know before I started is that the beauty of being an entrepreneur is not the sexy part. It's the part that is not sexy. It's the part that makes you grow. It's the part that makes you better. And sometimes we go into this because we want to make a lot of money, we want to be successful, and there's a lot of things that are fed to us, and we believe that. So I value the tough moments. I value those near death experience. I value all of that. So my thing that I wanted to know before I opened this is that those near death experience, everybody has it. And those
Yeah.
mad moments, everybody has it. And I think sometimes we try to say, well, there might be something wrong with me, and we blame ourselves. But look at Steve Jobs. He was really successful. And look at this other person. He was really successful. And for me, I will have wanted to learn how to have more resilience at the beginning and to learn that a lot of those challenges are common and everybody goes through those.
That's some great wisdom. I really appreciate it, and I have really enjoyed our conversation today. Before we wrap up, where can our listeners connect with you or learn more about what you're working on?
So they're free to send me an email, nacho@latinbrand.us. They're free to think about me every time they go to a Mexican restaurant as well. They're free to also look for my LinkedIn profile or go to our website, latinbrand.us, and you're going to have um, on your website all of our different social media pages. And they're also free to even text me. I'm open to that. My phone number is 210-262-2799. I'm not afraid to give it out. So they're free to have any type of connection that they want to have.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you to everybody for listening to C Suite Secrets. If you have found today's conversation as valuable as I have, be sure to hit that like and follow button and share with somebody else who's building a business. And if
And
you're an entrepreneur,
we're gonna do the t-shirts. We're gonna put a link for the t-shirts as well.
let's do it. So if you're an entrepreneur and you're at the point in your business where you're working hard and your business is growing, but you're not keeping as much cash as you should, or your numbers feel like a mystery, that's exactly why we created our one room boardroom. It's a hands on way to simplify your numbers, understand what's actually driving profit, and start making decisions like a financially minded CEO, not just reacting. If you want more insights between episodes, join us on Facebook at csuiteinsiders.com or find me on Instagram at Heather Parsons Official. Until next time, keep growing, and remember, you don't have to do this alone.